When practicing landings, the final approach of a traffic pattern is often a busy place. You're managing pitch and power to control your airspeed, you're trying to maintain a glide path, and you're adding flaps and preparing for touchdown. Because of this mental load, it makes for a difficult learning environment. And though you're practicing a procedure, you're also having to develop some muscle memory so your control inputs become more natural. And that can be easier said than done, right? Well, this video is going to describe how to manage your final approach path using outside visual references and give you some tips on where to look for information. Conceptualizing this before flying in the traffic pattern will help you become more smooth on your controls and hopefully help you develop confidence in the management of your descent. The first visual cue that helps is this thing here. It's called a PAPI, or Precision Approach Path Indicator. There are several different versions of these light bar glide slope visualizations, but the PAPI is pretty common. This will help you determine if you're too high or too low on the approach. A PAPI sits next to the runway, directly adjacent to the touchdown zone. It can be seen from miles away, so it makes a great visual reference. The correct approach path shown here is a nice 3-degree glide slope. This is a comfortable descent angle and is used by airliners when on approach. So when you're on glide path, you'll see 2 white lights and 2 red lights. If you descend below this glide path, more red lights will appear. So you can see by the indications at the bottom of the page, the white lights get replaced by red lights the lower you are below that normal approach path. The opposite is true if you climb above the glide path. Red lights get replaced by white lights. So the PAPI is a helpful visual reminder. You don't have to fly the PAPI, but it can help when rolling out of your base to final turn to gauge where you are in relation to that desirable, comfortable descent rate. Another visual cue I'll describe is using the runway numbers, or whatever aiming point you're using, to maintain a constant glide path. You can see that we have a PAPI indicator over there on the left. We're not really using it. It's showing three reds in this case. We're a little low. But let's focus our attention here on the runway numbers. We'll use these to establish our glide path and manage our descent. What you want to do is keep your aiming point, in this case the numbers, at the same distance from the top of the instrument panel throughout your final approach. So imagine here the instrument panel is, let's say 2 inches below the numbers. And now we've climbed a bit. So the distance between the instrument panel and the numbers has shrunk to about 1 inch. And now we've descended below our desired path, and the distance between the top of the instrument panel and the runway numbers, our aiming point, has grown to nearly 4 inches. The goal is to keep those numbers the same distance from the panel while keeping your airspeed constant. If you do that, you'll likely touch down right after that aiming point, just like this. You manage that distance between the instrument panel and numbers with power and keep your airspeed constant using pitch. So let's take a look at this from another angle. Here we are coming into land, and we have an aiming point of the runway numbers. You can see in the top right, there's a little representation of our outside view. Note the distance between the instrument panel and the aiming point. Okay, so now we've added a bit too much power and ended up too high. Well, guess what? You can see in the top right there that the aiming point has drifted under our nose a bit. So from the cockpit, it looks like the space between the instrument panel and the runway numbers has gotten smaller. Now we took out some power and ended up lower on our desired approach. See what happened there? The runway numbers now look like they've climbed up the windshield in front of us, and the space between them and the instrument panel is a lot bigger. And now we're back on glide path with our aiming point right where we want it to be. So this image is a little exaggerated, but it's actually pretty realistic in terms of what happens on final approach. You'll be making constant minor adjustments to your pitch in order to maintain your airspeed, but to keep those backward and forward movements of the controls from translating into climbs and descents, you'll need to also be adjusting power to stay on glide path. When you're above the glide path and the space between the instrument panel gets smaller, you reduce power a bit. And when you are below glide path and the space between the instrument panel gets bigger, you increase power. And of course, this is a little bit of a dance, so if you change your power, you often need to adjust your pitch as well. These minor little adjustments happen all the way down to the runway. And during training, one of the main objectives is to make these minor corrections more instinctual. So, what about when you actually do get down to the runway and need to flare? What happens then? Well, now you reduce your power to idle and look out toward the end of the runway. You do the same thing you were doing before. You keep the end of the runway the same distance from the instrument panel, and with no power to keep you flying, you'll slowly rotate into a flare and let your main wheels touch down first. It works like a charm once you get it figured out. This landing approach might seem tricky, and for new pilots it can be. It takes practice and repetition, and there's no better way to learn this than by using a simulator, because you can pause, start and stop, and move the plane to just where the hard parts are. With an instructor in the sim with you, it can really accelerate your training. So we hope you found this helpful and look forward to flying with you soon.